Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington Hall. Thank you for joining us. Please welcome to the stage the 17th President of the University of Notre Dame, Reverend John I. Jenkins, CSC.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us, both those who are here with us in person as well as others who are viewing this online. As we mark MLK Day and Walk the Walk Week here on campus, I hope that we have all had the opportunity to take some time over these last few days to think about Dr. King's legacy, about how we can be a force for good in addressing racism, inequality, and injustice wherever they exist. I'm going to be brief because our purpose this evening is to hear what these people to my left have to say about how we are here at Notre Dame, how we at Notre Dame can build the beloved community about which Dr. King spoke so eloquently. I do want to say a special word of thanks to student government as well as they were instrumental in putting together tonight's discussion. Special thanks to Alan Jomo, student body president, and to Amaya Medeiros, Director of Diversity and Inclusion for Student Government, for their leadership. Yes, let's give them a round of applause. For their leadership in planning tonight's program, and also, of course, to our student panelists, whom we will introduce shortly. To become the Notre Dame we seek to be, it is not the work of some of us, but all of us. And this work is not optional for any of us, for it is at the heart of our mission to make Notre Dame a place that is ever more characterized by respect for every person, care for one another, and a commitment to justice and solidarity. I hope tonight's conversation will provide all of us important food for thought about the next steps we might take to build an even better Notre Dame. Tonight's discussion will be moderated by Professor Diane Pinderhughes. Professor Pinderhughes joined the faculty at Notre Dame in 2006. She is a Notre Dame Presidential Faculty Fellow and a professor of Africana Studies and Political Science, holding a concurrent faculty appointment in American Studies and serving also as a faculty fellow at the Kellogg Institute and a research faculty member in Gender Studies. Thank you for the applause. In a moment, we will turn to this evening's conversation over to Professor Pinderhughes. But first, I would like to invite Professor Maria McKenna to offer the invocation. Professor McKenna directs the university's Transformational Leaders Program and serves as an associate professor of the practice with a joint appointment in the Department of Africana Studies and the Education, Schooling, and Society program. After the prayer, Professor Pinderhughes will introduce our panel of student leaders. Professor McKenna.
Let us pray. God of infinite wisdom and grace, as we gather together this evening to consider the opportunities and challenges that come with striving for a beloved community, here at Notre Dame and in the world, we humbly seek your intercession. We ask for strength of heart and a listening disposition. We ask that you continue to be ever present in our midst as we grapple with injustice, hatred, day-to-day aggressions, and the evil of racism. Please guide our work towards a world more fully attuned to the needs of the whole, where dignified work, equitable shared resources, a reverence for diversity, a respect for our planet, and the sacredness of human life are guiding principles for all of us. We offer gratitude for the gifts of the Holy Spirit guiding our lives: wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. Please bless those men and women of our world, including Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his family, on whose examples of moral sensitivity, hard work, and grace we rely for sustenance and guidance today and always. Through the intercession of Mary, we pray. Amen. Dr. Pinderhughes.
Good evening. We are going to reveal ourselves here, so I will be the first to take it off. I thought I would say a few moments before I do the introductions. Thank you, Father Jenkins, for your presence and your introduction, and Professor Maria McKenna for our invocation. It's my task to introduce the panelists this evening and moderate tonight's discussion of the topic, Building the Beloved Community at Notre Dame. This idea came from the musings of our own Vice President and Associate Provost, Reverend Dr. Hugh Page, who told us of his thoughts of King and that this discussion would help us move from where we are to where we want to be. So I looked for a few comments, and it's really quite astonishing. I didn't do a lot, but let me read a little bit from King. He was a prolific writer and preacher. On August 11th, 1956, he delivered The Birth of a New Age at the 50th anniversary of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity in Buffalo. He said, and this is just a short amount from a very long talk, "We must prepare to go into this new age without bitterness. That is a temptation, that is a danger to all of those of us who have lived for many years under the yoke of oppression, and those of us who have been confronted with injustice. Those of us who have lived under the evils of segregation and discrimination will go into the new age with bitterness and indulging in hate campaigns. We cannot do it that way, for if we do it that way, it will be just a perpetuation of the old way. We must conquer the hate of the old age and the love of the new age, and go into a new age with a love that is understanding for all men, to have with it a forgiving attitude. It has with it something that will cause you to look deep down within every man and see within him something of godliness. That's something that will cause you to stand up before him and love him." Toward what we now know was the end of his career on April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year before his assassination on April 4th the following year, King spoke in the Riverside Church in New York City of Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence. A time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexed as they often do in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. But we must move on. So it's now my task to introduce our distinguished panelists. These bright young faces are looking at me. Our panelists this evening, and I've done them in alphabetical order, so you'll wave your hand when I say your name. Alvaro Carrillo Marcano is founder and current president of the Puerto Rican Students Association. Gabe McKenna is president of Prism ND. Ife Nwebube is president of the Black Students Association. Connor Patrick is chairperson of all Notre Dame cultural clubs for the Club Coordination Council and also president of the Voices of Faith Gospel Choir. Yvette Pino is Columbus Murals Committee, has served on that, and she's a member of NASAND, the Native American Students at Notre Dame. And then Stephanie Wong is president of the Student Bar Association, third-year law student. So we've asked our panelists to talk about building the beloved community at Notre Dame, what ideas they have for us of what will be a foundation for that community. I had intended to actually ask them who wanted to go first, but I forgot to do that as we were talking back there. So I'll open up the floor and you can start. Whoever wants to start can do so.
I don't mind.
All right.
Yes, I figure. So, hey everybody, it's a pleasure being here. Talking about building a beloved community, I think that's a daunting task. It's something that's not done from, one day to another. I think it's a long process. But something I believe and I think it's crucial is the first step is educating people. This campus has a lot of cultural differences. That's evident. But some of these differences sometimes are not exposed in the correct way. So I think some people don't have the knowledge of how diverse we really are. I'll give you an example. Something that the university has started to do, and we spoke about this before, is, I don't know if you've seen these flags that are like, I think South Quad or North Quad. I saw them in South Quad. And I think that's just a little step moving forward that just showcases people these different countries that are on campus. And that first step to exposing people, giving that knowledge of these different cultures we have on campus, I think moving forward is the correct way. Here in Notre Dame, sometimes we may think there's not that much diversity, but I think there is. It's just we gotta show it to people through different means, different ways, and this is an example of that. There's a lot more other examples how to do that, but I think that's for sure the first step.
Thank you.
Along those lines of education, I think also that awareness that everyone around you, everyone has their own struggles, but not just ignoring and believing that the ones right next to you might be the ones that are struggling the most. Especially everything that's happening in our country, terrible incidents of hate crimes and violence. They may be happening in higher statistically in bigger cities, but that doesn't mean that the people next to you aren't suffering as much, aren't suffering, with their mental health. Last year, especially with the pandemic, with COVID-19, there was a huge spike in racial crimes, hate crimes against Asian Americans, and even though that was happening, you were seeing it in the news in cities like New York, San Francisco. Me and my classmates, sometimes we were scared to go outside. And I remember one day just sitting in class on my laptop, should have been paying attention, but was looking at Twitter. I saw trending this woman who was just walking down the street in New York, and a man just shoved her and started stomping on her head. And I had to get up and walk out of class, and I was crying. And I know we're here for school, academics is a top priority of us, but that was a really hard time for me as a student. And I think, when we educate ourselves, as you were saying, about that our classmates around us are diverse, have different culture experiences, but being aware of what's going on in society and not ignoring it and pretending that's not happening or affecting us, I think those are really important steps to really build a beloved and safe community here.
And going off of that, I feel that with when you're educated and then once you have the awareness, you have to figure out how to apply those two to change the environment that you're in. So here at Notre Dame, people can educate themselves and become aware through so many of the resources that Notre Dame has to offer, but it's the consistent attitude of, do I want to still be educated? Do I still want to be aware? And being more inclusive as well. I know coming in as first years, you're nervous about meeting new people. Will I fit in? Having a sense of belonging, having that home away from home that Notre Dame wants. And if everyone is more aware of the inclusive language that they have within each other as peers, and then how that inclusivity is shown through their actions, that can also change and improve the idea of having a beloved community here.
In thinking about what it means to build a beloved community and thinking about tonight's talk, I've actually been thinking a lot about the motto of the Green Dot Initiative on campus. Nobody has to do everything, but everybody has to do something. And I think that on our campus, in our country, in our world, some people are doing everything. A lot of those people for our campus are here in this room tonight, from student government, from the Office of the President, people working for diversity and inclusion. But I don't believe that everybody's doing something. And I think we ought to. I think a lot of people need to, as Alvaro and Stephanie and Fifi, as you all said, to educate ourselves, to become aware of what's going on, and then to do something about it. No single one of us is going to single-handedly pass voting rights legislation or, make any of these, grand sweeping changes by ourselves. But we all can do little things, and that starts with just showing up. That starts with, I think, just showing up to events like these. And we make excuses for ourselves sometimes. We're too busy, we have homework, we have this, we have that, to kind of avoid kind of coming to events like these where we can educate ourselves and can become aware of what's going on in our world, on our campus, around us. But I think that first step is actually just showing up and being present.
I was at an event before this, the Black at ND event in the UCO Theater in DPAC, and one student raised the question of the way in which Notre Dame sees itself, where he's come in contact with alumni who talk very favorably about Notre Dame, as it's always wonderful and there's nothing wrong with it. This is a black student who was talking about, who wasn't sure how to handle a situation like that, because he felt it might put him in some jeopardy in terms of being recognized as somebody who would be treated well after that. So how do you think about dealing with that? I see you're smiling at me.
Okay, so I guess the question is, how do you, yes. How do you deal with talking to somebody who thinks so highly of Notre Dame? And obviously Notre Dame has a lot of good things to offer, not just to its students, but to, I would say, the people around the country, because everybody seems to know somebody that goes to Notre Dame or somebody who went to Notre Dame. But the reality is Notre Dame is not perfect. There have been times that we'll hear that I have felt unwelcome, and there have been other people in NASAND as well, and I'm sure the other groups here on campus who have felt that their voices don't matter. And I think what is important to realize is that, first of all, you need to listen when they are speaking to you. And handling somebody who thinks that Notre Dame is great is a good thing, but also realizing that your voice matters and telling them the reality is that Notre Dame isn't great all the time, and that's okay. And it's the only way that change is going to happen is if we are realistic about what Notre Dame is and the goals it has, and that it may not be there yet.
And I think that, going off what you said, to love something isn't to overlook its flaws. And in fact, it's the opposite. To love something is to see its flaws and see, this is still not quite a home for everyone, but because I love the Golden Dome, because I love our Mother Mary, I want to do what I can to make it that home for everyone. And I feel like, the truth and the reality of where we stand is uncomfortable. But there's a lot of good that will come out of addressing it as it is.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question to your question.
Okay.
So you were saying the student was concerned about expressing his some dissatisfied experiences he had at Notre Dame, and he was fearful of doing that.
Well, he's talking literally about meeting an alumnus who was so positive, who thought everything at Notre Dame was perfect. And he was like, What do I say to that? How do I deal with that?
Immediately I was wondering, I was like, oh, what is the gender and race and ethnicity of this alum that he was meeting with?
I don't know that he mentioned that.
Yeah. But, and then, everybody has a different experience at Notre Dame. Not everyone's going to have the same experience. I don't think, and I'm not trying to bring in sometimes that older generation excuse, but sometimes you just can't change people's minds, unfortunately, especially when someone's so far skewed in their beliefs. And I guess in that situation, he could have just been honest and said, I'm really wonderful. It's wonderful to hear that you had such an amazing experience here, but that wasn't the case for me. When I first came to Notre Dame, in the law school, I immediately saw that it was not that diverse. And
Where did you go to undergrad school?
I went to University of Florida,
Very different, yes.
which actually is not as diverse either, but it is a campus of 50,000 people,
Right.
so
Right.
it's very big, and you can find large communities there that you feel safe. And yeah, when I came to Notre Dame, it was definitely a culture shock for me, and I kind of knew that going in. I prepared myself. But when I was here for Admitted Students Week, I really connected with one of the admission ambassadors, who was a woman of color, and it really struck me how I was able to feel more comfortable and was more willing to come here because of that representation. And me and a lot of my classmates, we've really we made sure we were involved with being admissions ambassadors, with these affinity groups, like all of us here, because we wanted to make sure that when other diverse students came, their experiences weren't, as challenging or less challenged, maybe similar to that individual. But I love what you're saying, there's a lot of flaws, but I would never tell anyone not to come here. I've had a great experience at the law school so far.
Yeah. I think it's actually better for us and that individual that he knew, that he recognized and accepted that Notre Dame is not perfect. And I think it's better to have that option, that thinking everything here is perfect and there's nothing to change. Because when you have that, that's when you hit stagnation, and that's the worst thing that can happen. And I could say I've had both sides of the coin. Same as you said, that sometimes you felt unwelcome. I remember it was early admission students. They flew me from Puerto Rico here, and I had an exchange with an individual that was like very shocking, and I had that experience that was like, let's say that was the bad experience, and then you look at one of the best experiences I've had here, and it wasn't personally affecting me. It was last year, tragically, we lost 2 Latina students to a tragic accident, and the way campus mobilized and our Latino community, there's multiple ways they get in contact, but the undergrad community just moved so quickly. Remember, we went to the grotto before the official mass that was being done with Father Pete and Jenkins. Before that, we went to the grotto first, and we're like 150, and we had a prayer, and that way that community got close, it was amazing. It was one of the times I felt the most included here. So, I've had both sides. Okay. And that bad side, that led me to be more active when I came here, and proud of my Puerto Rican heritage. That was a huge motivator to make the Puerto Rican Student Association and make people aware of our culture. Because I'm sure the comment from that individual didn't come from any type of hatred or anger. It was purely ignorance, and that's what I said in my previous comment. Like, that's the importance of exposing people to different things. So, finding flaws is not bad at all. It's not bad at all. I think that's how we can improve things. So.
Comments? I mean, I can take something from this thing here. Well, is there something the university has recently done that has made Notre Dame more welcoming? I'll ask that, and then we'll go to the other side. I'll say it again. Is there something the university has recently done that has made Notre Dame more welcoming?
something small but meant a lot was for Indigenous Peoples Day, they had the Potawatomi flag flown for about a week with all the other major flags, which meant a lot to the Native community because it felt like finally like we're being recognized, especially because Indigenous Peoples Day was formerly known as Columbus Day, which is, you know, a tough subject. So that's something that the university did that was very positive and made me feel a little bit more welcome here.
And one thing I noticed as I was preparing for classes, the Columbus murals, which you were on the committee, and those murals are now covered, but every semester there'll be 2 weeks when they're open and classes can come and visit. So I've scheduled that for my class on my college seminar and have invited a student who has worked on that issue and written about it to come and meet with us as well. I'll make sure that I show the photos, pictures of them, their reproductions in various locations to the class before we go, so it's not like the first time they see it will be when they get there. But, I mean, it's not been done before, so it'll be interesting to see how it works out. I've talked with Ann Firth, President Jenkins' assistant, because I didn't want to just show up with a class and then there'd be another class there, so I made sure to schedule the time. I think that's that was a big issue and took a lot of time. And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how that happened. You were on the committee. How it took years, right? And how did you contribute to that?
Sure. So I got involved freshman year. I'm a junior now, but I took a year off. So freshman year, Father Jenkins reached out to me and asked if I would like to be on the committee. And as a small freshman, I'm like, what do I have to bring? Why am I being asked to do this? But I think what came out of it was positive, and I'm really glad that they're covered, especially because during an American Studies class, they brought us to go see them as like part of our Columbus, like trying to tell the real story about like what actually happened, and he shouldn't be glorified. So seeing those murals for the first time and not even knowing they were there was shocking, made me feel like I was unwelcome, and made me feel like my voice doesn't matter. But being on the committee made me realize that yes, my voice does matter, and I should be speaking up about the issues that we as a community face, because I believe that Notre Dame is better than that.
Anything else that Gabe? It looks like Gabe was.
I mean, there's been a couple developments in the past few years. I know, it had to have been maybe 2 years ago, the university, in response to the campus climate survey of 2020, and the overwhelming statistic that trans and non-binary students feel unwelcome, like they don't belong here. In response to that statistic, they actually created a student advisory committee for that, which honestly means a lot because it's a place to have that conversation, a place to try and figure out solutions so that students can feel like they belong here. And honestly, on a small departmental level, something that really made my day was at the beginning of last semester, seeing fill out this survey for the College of Science to indicate your preferred pronouns so that your professors and your advisors will know how to properly refer to you. And a pronoun is a tiny, tiny word in all of the words in the language, but it's a tiny word that means a lot to me and means a lot to our transgender students. So getting to see that start to be implemented by colleges is great. I just wish that every single college on campus would take that initiative and take that tiny little step for belonging.
Thank you for that. We'll be sharing that with our various committees and deans. Very good.
The law school has done a couple things, I think, to make it a little more welcoming. First off, they've recently hired a diversity, equity, and inclusion program director, and it's the first time that the law school has had a faculty role specifically dedicated to diversity efforts, and this was something that a lot of the diverse students wanted, and seeing that they finally listened to us and that this faculty member is here, finally, it's a really great thing to make a lot of the minority students feel a lot more welcomed. And something that I was able to see since starting off as a first-year law student, they created a first-generation professionals organization, another club. But what was interesting was that, as you see the title, it's first-generation professionals. This includes students they're the first in their family to go to law school. They're the first in their family to even go to a graduate program. And even students interpreted it as, I'm a first-generation immigrant. So it kind of brought in a lot of different members of our community, and they assigned us with professors as mentors. And that, to me, actually was really helpful throughout my law school career, because having a professor who had clerked for a Supreme Court justice, but actually being really honest with me and telling me about her upbringing and how she was the first in her family to even go to college and the struggles she had along the way, helped me realize that, not everything is perfect for everyone, and we all really just go through our own challenges and struggles to get to where we are.
And meeting someone and talking with someone in a face-to-face way about the challenges that person had is always a helpful opportunity to understand that you can manage it. You can figure out how to do it. And it's a technical thing. It's not just technical, but it's technical to know some of the details of how that person handled the situation. I don't want to keep anybody from talking. You see?
I feel, one thing I've noticed with my syllabi since we just started school, most or if not all of my syllabi have acknowledged that our education's on the land of Indigenous people. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, but I just thought that was really cool. And just to acknowledge that, and then with the removal of the Columbus murals, that's just been really huge. And then another thing, as an RA, we were told at the beginning of RA training that the incoming freshman class, so this freshman class is the most diverse, and I think with the minority groups here on campus, there are strength in numbers, and the bigger we are, I feel like the stronger we can all feel. And it's not even just socially, it's just in the classroom, not feeling like you're the only one. So that's been pretty huge.
Well, let's see. There are some questions. What advice would you offer to first-year students who have an opportunity to help bring change to campus? You are all seniors, right? No, you're junior. What are your years? I didn't go through this. Juniors, okay. But you're a third-year law student, so you're graduating. So, what advice would you give to first years?
Yeah, I think when I was the first year, everybody's scared. I don't know. I was scared. I was scared when I got here. It's really weird being here as a native, Spanish speaker. But the best advice I can give is, apart from being in your dorm life, don't be afraid to go to more public events. That's something that I started doing sophomore, junior year, maybe even late sophomore year. So, because the university did a really good job in exposing me to the international student community, and that kind of made me stay in that bunch. And that's something that I would recommend to students sometimes. Maybe try to go more public events made by the university, for example. And I think one of the best things you could do now as a freshman that would really open your mind and learn about different things is these events I've seen in campus about salsa nights, cultural dance nights, events that give you exposure to different foods. I'm a huge food, and I never underestimate the power of food. Never. Like, food is, if it's good food, it'll make you in love with the culture, and you'll learn more. So, that kind of stuff, it's powerful. And dancing as well. I went recently to a dance event, and I got exposed to something called cumbia, which is a dance from Latin America, and from what I understood, it's from like Colombia, and it's spread across the whole region, and it's the manifestation of African slaves expressing their discontent with their status quo. So from a dance like that, you learn all that culture, and then you understand when you engage with someone on campus with that kind of roots, you know where they're coming from. So that's my advice at first, is get exposed to these different events. Don't just stay in your tight-knit niche community, whether it's your dorm or friends from back home, if you had that blessing of, but just being a bit more open-minded. And I think the school is working pretty hard on creating those type of events.
I usually try to put some events on my syllabi and encourage students to go. Let me ask you a question. So does that work? Yeah? Just, not a requirement, but just letting people know that it's happening and encouraging them to think about going to listen to a particular person speak.
Students love extra credit.
That's true.
Yes, I did. I've done sort of an experiment. One class I have extra credit, the other I don't have it. So we'll see how it goes. Advice to first years? I know there's more.
I completely agree with what you said, Alvaro. I think it all goes back to showing up, It's easy to kind of self-select into like your own little tight-knit community, be that your dorm, people from back home. And there's just a treasure trove of opportunities on our campus based on the events that MSPS puts on, or the events that all the various clubs like the Puerto Rican Student Association puts on. There's so many opportunities out there, and especially for those who are in the majority. We need to move beyond our very one-sided specific view of Notre Dame and recognize the incredible diversity that is on our campus, but we need to seek it out. We need to show up, and we need to look for it.
All right, so I'm going to go to another question. Reflecting on the 1956 speech of Dr. King, how can Notre Dame build an environment of redemption and this is a tough one, but an environment of redemption and transformation among its student body and at the university more generally? This is kind of really the core question for this event. So, thinking about it. You've been thinking about it for the last week as we talked ahead of time. You've got your leaders, other student leaders, the president's here. What should Notre Dame do?
So for me, the way I interpreted that question, it came down to the individual and setting an example. I actually reflected a lot about how Dr. King really embodied being this example of forgiveness and redemption. And it really, I think, him standing for the values of nonviolence and really creating this beloved community, especially during a time when there was so much violence and atrocities occurring against the Black and African American community. And him just being able to take it and, if wanting to shake somebody's hand at the risk of being punched in the face, which happened so many times. That to me, I was like, I just didn't know how he could be so brave and courageous and willing to turn the other cheek and keep turning the other cheek. And to me, and especially in today's climate and environment, it can be so hard, but you have to be that example of forgiveness and be that example to those around you so that you can create this culture of redemption and reconciliation. As I had mentioned before, the violence against and hate crimes against Asian Americans was so painful to watch, and it was tough to see because it was also other people of color committing that violence against this community. But understanding that a lot of these people that were committing these crimes, they have mental health issues. They're not getting the help they need. And even recently, I don't know if you saw, but a woman was pushed in front of a subway train in New York City and died. And the person, he was homeless and had really bad mental health issues. Right. And as painful as it was to see that, you have to be that example to forgive and understand that you can't fight violence with violence. So it's hard, and creating that community here at Notre Dame, I really think it just starts with yourself, because you can't tell other people to do it if you can't do it yourself.
Yeah, and I think something moving forward tangible a school can do is, first thing that came to mind is accountability, and it's not the accountability of kind of like the cancel culture, and that in a certain way you can cancel what you want or what you don't like. I'm talking about, and that can be seen as accountability. What I'm referring to is tangibly thinking of what we can do, what metrics we can hit moving forward. I know the school has recognized certain numbers they're trying to hit when it comes to diversity, but moving forward, keeping those numbers every year, making them a bit more aggressive, but at a doable rate, something that's actually doable, and holding accountable our leaders and who we are as students as well. I think this is an important step to do that. Discussing this, that's the process for accountability. We have to understand, what do we actually want? What are we looking for? Mm-hmm. That's the most important step, and we're doing that right now. So we're good on that department, I think, and keep moving forward. We should keep doing things like this. But accountability is the most important thing, and targeted accountability, not just canceling whatever you think is what you don't want. It's more having dialogue and setting meaningful metrics and targets.
Going off of Alvaro's point, BSA had made a call to action with a couple of other Black student leaders from Shades of Ebony and Wabruta and ASA and the other Black clubs to basically do what Alvaro was talking about in different sectors, whether it was student life or campus policing, the Moreau course, especially with the talks about diversity in the Moreau course and making sure that people were actually having that discussion properly. So during that time we had met with EHH, but she's no longer here, but there have been continued conversations. And I think going off of Alvaro's point about responsibility and being transparent with the school and the school being transparent with us, I think that steps have been made, but it's only the beginning, and there can be more done, and more will be done, I think.
So I've heard students talk about Moreau over the years, and it was a program, a course created that was a replacement for physical education. So even though a lot of times students have been critical of the Moreau courses, it's something that moved things along. So what have you done, what have you been doing in terms of this effort at improving the Moreau course, given that you've targeted it already?
Yeah, so, the main problem that some of my own Black peers have shared with me and other people is that when they went to Moreau their freshman year, it's either the professor canceled class, and it just so happened to be the day that they were supposed to talk about diversity, or they went to class, and then the professor was like, so what do you guys want to talk about? And then no one said anything, so then they just ended class. Or they did talk about diversity, but the professor didn't know how to facilitate it properly, or just let students say some very ignorant and microaggressive statements. Mm-hmm. So another student leader, Max Siegel, he also was in those conversations, and basically a group of students had met with the school to change the outlook of Moreau to make sure that everyone is actually going through the talk, first of all, and then to also maintain that cultural competency or grow that cultural competency that they didn't have before.
Yes, I'm just taking a deep breath. So I think Connor wants to say something.
Well, kind of piggybacking off of Moreau, the Moreau Student Advisory Council hasn't met in a long time.
Didn't know there was one. Thank you for telling us this.
I happen to be on it, but maybe I got removed because it's been many months. So I think I may have been fired or something. It's either that or we just haven't met in a really long time. And I feel like that's a kind of vehicle where we can have conversations just like that with the people who help to actually create the course and implement all the modules that take place week after week and set the policies. That's just one example of a great way to actually have those discussions. But we haven't been having, or I haven't been in those discussions. If they I don't know if the council's been meeting or not, but
Okay.
I don't think it has.
Okay. I think it's a challenging thing to have undertaken because of the size of the population of faculty population that is of color, and I'm never going to say that only faculty of color can handle these discussions because it's not true. But because of the reality of one's professional life, it's more likely that faculty of color would be able to handle those kinds of discussions. Now, having said that, it takes time for there to be, number one, for this to have the course and to have the discussion and to realize and recognize, for example, if it is really interesting to hear what you said and you summarized the varying ways in which people were inadequate in the role rather well, that they were either, they couldn't talk about it, they canceled the class, they invited the students to talk but didn't know how to discuss it themselves because clearly they weren't comfortable. And getting that comfort is something you get just because you're a faculty member, an African American, for example, myself, my own experiences as a faculty member over many decades now. You don't start that way. You don't start being able to do that. It takes a long time before you get to the point of some degree of being able to look students in the eye and have a conversation and help them also know what to say to them, namely, this is a difficult subject. It's not an easy conversation. You have to understand each other and reflect and be willing to respect each other's views, even though you're going to have some disagreements. That's going to happen. But the challenge in any class like that or when you begin that subject is to frame it in such a way that the students understand how to have the conversation. I can't have any of the things you were describing where people make negative comments about other students, but if the faculty member doesn't intervene and doesn't frame it at the beginning, then you're going to have that, you're going to encounter that kind of problem. So I've never had to try to teach people how to do this. I've never done that. But from my own experience, I know that it's something that you begin to be able to do over a long period of time. So it will take some time before, hopefully, the framing the issue and figuring out how to identify those faculty that have some issues, have problems, and perhaps they can be encouraged to have discussions with each other about this. But if they don't want to talk about it, if they're not comfortable enough, it's not going to happen. So I can see I'm getting myself into trouble here. Okay, so, Gabe, I think you...
Oh, I was just going to echo what you were saying, is that it's so scary to be uncomfortable. But it's so important for our majority allies to embrace that discomfort, because if they don't, then all that discomfort just gets pushed back onto the minority students. And it's only just that, they also share in that vulnerability of maybe they don't know what to say at first. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Okay, that was very, very good. Now, We're right at 9:10, which is the point at which we're supposed to be taking questions from. Yeah, from the masses out there, but Yvette wants to comment.
Yes, to kind of echo off of everybody else on the panels, I think Notre Dame needs to do a better job of listening to the students and understanding that, if a group of minority students is telling you that something is making them uncomfortable or making their experience at Notre Dame less than positive, you should probably listen. I don't think that there should be a student at Notre Dame who should feel like they're unwelcome. And I understand that it's going to be really difficult to make sure that every single student feels like they belong, but no student should want to go home for breaks. They shouldn't feel like they need to, for the only way for them to feel home is to actually go home. Because you're here for 5 months, 4 or 5 months, and it shouldn't be where you feel uncomfortable the entire time. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. This is a different type of question. Could you please speak to any experiences or perspectives on engaging with others from different faith backgrounds? So I see Connor or maybe Gabe, I don't know.
I can talk.
Okay.
I identify as a Catholic, love being a Catholic. I joined a choir my freshman year, though, that is not Catholic. It is Christian, and so we are, as Catholic
Extremely
Christians.
Christian. Voices of Faith is extremely Christian.
Very,
in a good way. I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of a non-denominational choir, I would say. It's the Voices of Faith Gospel Choir. I'm the president now, and it's been a wonderful space to meet people on campus who are not Catholic or not even religious at all, and people from all different backgrounds. And I mean, that's just one example where I happened to just show up for choir practice one day, and I fell in love with it, and I kept continuing with it. And I pray that every Notre Dame student has an opportunity like that and is lucky and blessed enough to be able to experience something like that, no matter what they do. Maybe it's someone they just sit next to in class, or whether they intentionally engage with those kinds of conversations, like the ones that the Center for Social Concerns and Campus Ministry hosts. I hope that everyone has an experience like that, because it's been a blessing for me. I mean, I'm still singing with Voices of Faith. We're singing at the prayer service right after this panel, and so yeah, it's been a blessing.
Yeah.
So I remember when I entered as a 1L, I saw the demographics of my class, and it said that 50% of the students were Catholic, and the other 50% were other religions and faiths. So I thought that was, really interesting, and especially with the law school. And I know we're a little more detached and siloed from the rest of campus. But I will say that I know that I have some classmates who are Muslim, and they've had some challenging experiences here. I know one of my good friends, she's Muslim. Her first week at Notre Dame, she was walking to her apartment, and a truck drove by, and the guys yelled stuff at her. So it's not perfect, and there are students who are different religions and faiths, and they do feel themselves very othered here. One thing I'll say though too, in the law school they offered a Islamic law class, and I jumped at the opportunity to take
My
it.
colleague teaches that class.
Oh
yeah,
yes,
political science.
Amelia.
Yes.
I love her. She's awesome, and I wish everyone could take that class.
Very interesting class.
There are so many stereotypes and very uneducated comments coming from the news and media about Islam, and taking that class, I learned how similar the faith is to Catholicism, and I'm so glad Notre Dame offered that class. I was very surprised Notre Dame would, and honestly, it was one of my favorite classes here, and it was just something that I wish everyone could take, and just learning that I just can't imagine actually being someone who's Muslim and being here at Notre Dame, to be honest. So, yeah.
Oh boy. Okay, that's a comment. All right. Any other that I can go on? All right. Yes, Scott.
Kind of just going right off of that, I was thinking about it when you mentioned the call to action that BSA and a lot of clubs listed. I believe that one of the action items on there was a requirement in the core curriculum for like an intercultural requirement for the core curriculum for all Notre Dame students. And going back to like what we were saying about like tangible actions that can be taken, like wouldn't it be great if everyone was able to take a class like that, or was able to take a class on the writings of Dr. King, or able to take a class on the pastoral letter "Open Wide Our Hearts," on the the bishops addressing the evil of racism. Because a lot of times right now it's we select those classes, we seek out those classes. But wouldn't it be great if like an explicit requirement was that everyone had to be part of that?
There's work being done in that direction. It's been one of those years, but there's a committee that's working and looking at how to construct a set of requirements, and what kinds of characteristics would go into that. But that's coming.
Great.
For sure. I can say that. So, how do you create a space of belonging and still call out problem behavior? It's kind of another one of those core questions. How do you create a space of belonging and still call out problem behavior?
I think the most important thing is when you see something wrong, you got to call it out. And it's hard to be uncomfortable, what you mentioned, but sometimes we have to learn how to get on that uncomfort zone and deal with the things that are wrong, because we're not going to be able to change anything here if we don't feel comfortable. And it's something that, said before, conversations like these start opening this space for us to be more willing to talk about it. But if we're going to build a beloved community, it's built by everybody. And everybody, we need to start moving forward and understanding that we need to engage in these kind of conversations. There's no way, if you want to get out of this, you're not contributing to that beloved community. And then are we reaching that point? So it's the mentality that we have to call things out when we see them wrong. And nowadays, you have to be very careful with what you say. I mentioned before, there can be consequences like certain reactions, but I think it's when you see something wrong, you have to call it out. And there's no place in this campus for racism or any type of bigotry against someone, but feeling uncomfortable cannot be a factor to deter you from calling things out, So I don't know. It's an action item that's a bit more personal. We have to do it at a personal level, but we have to recognize it.
So I'm curious about something. You are the founder and president of the Puerto Rican Students Association. That is a distinctly non-Irish organization. So have you gotten criticism from students about, there's always people who are willing to say, well, why wouldn't you be like the rest of us? You're here at Notre Dame. Why would you create this other separate space?
To be honest with you, it's after starting the association, people are more happy they see this, especially students and faculty. A lot of faculties reached out to me and reached out to the Notre Dame, the club email, saying like, "Oh my God, it was time somebody did it." I'm like, there's been like 40 generations, because Notre Dame always recruits from Puerto Rico. There's always some students from Puerto Rico, and I was surprised why it didn't happen before. And when the association started, and the faculty advisor, Maricel Moreno, she jumped on immediately to help be the faculty advisor. She really helped us to kick things on, and then the community received the club so well. And thing that blew my mind is we were freshly approved by Student Activities Office. We had our first event. Puerto Rico was hit by an earthquake. We're typically hit by hurricanes, but that was an earthquake in the southern part of the island. And I started this association. I'm like, okay, now I got to do something. I can't just talk. I got to walk the talk. And we created this event to fundraise money to send food supplies and certain things to the southern part of Puerto Rico. And we did this event in La Fun, and we literally had a laptop with pictures from what happened in Puerto Rico and a label that said, please donate Puerto Rico Earthquake Relief Fund. The amount of money we received from not only faculty members, but students, I was like, okay, I was not expecting this. I hope I was going to get like $100 or max 200, but we ended up raising like more than $2,000 in just an hour and a half in the fun.
Wow, wonderful.
And that was an hour and a half. And we were starting. Now we've been a bit more, we know how to fundraise a bit better, but like people in Notre Dame want it, like they will receive us. We just have to take the action. And that blew my mind. When that was one event, and we've been able to fundraise other monies for Puerto Rico. Sadly, we're an island that's very prone to multiple difficulties. But yeah, like the community will receive you. You got to take the action, and people are open-minded for sure. So,
any others?
I think for people who, let's say, they said an ignorant comment, there are always resources at your disposal, especially at Notre Dame, to become better and to improve upon your cultural competency. There's mindfulness training, there's Green Dot, you can do the training with Paige Jackson. There's just like so many things. And also you have a phone. There's like resources on your phone that you can use. And at this day and age, there are just so many. So I feel like if you said something ignorant, microaggression, whatever the case may be, there are always ways that you can improve upon yourself. It's just you need to acknowledge that you did something wrong, educate yourself, and then move forward in a positive way.
Getting the person who made the comment to acknowledge that, though, is a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
That's what I would wonder. How do you respond? So, Yvette, do you want to comment?
I guess it's like the question, like, you asked me to respond to how can you possibly get somebody to recognize that fault. I don't think that you're going to be able to have anybody just change like that. And I don't want to say that it puts it back on us, because that's not really fair. But I think just sharing your experience and helping them realize that what they do matters, and it hurts. It hurts really, really badly. And hopefully that just reaches some part of them to make them realize that we're human too, and we are very vulnerable to those aggressions, and we carry those with us for a very long time, if not for the rest of our lives.
Very powerful. I'm going to say that we're close to the point where we're going to ask Student Body President Alan Ilmo to summarize the remarks, but I thought I would invite each one of you to offer some closing comments, just, a minute or so. I'm going to go to Gabe first.
Oh, all right.
A lot of warning, I'm sorry.
All good. What I want to say, I'm honored to be on this panel with all of you. I think you're kind of the coolest kids on campus, even though I just met you a couple days ago. And I just say, everyone deserves to find belonging here, even if for my community, there are so many people at this university who thinks that simply our existence is wrong, which isn't even touching on like our joy, our experiences, our relationships, and our identity. And that is a big challenge. But if there are students out there, professors, administrators, that are dedicated to serving the church's mission of inclusion and solidarity, that, you know, just get to know us as humans first, and we can figure out the rest of the crap later.
Also quite an honor for me to be with all of you too. I feel kind of out of place. I don't know. You all are like, you know, presidents of, you all are wickedly insane leaders just doing amazing things on campus. And so thanks for all you do, and for everyone here, thanks for all that you're doing, even just by like showing up to this event is incredible. And I think I'll just close with how I started with that. It just takes showing up, you know, it just takes being present for one another and being love for one another. And it just starts with, you know, showing up, because not, as I also said at the beginning, not, you know, some people are doing everything, but everyone can and should do something, even if it's just a little something, even if it's just, you know, smiling at the, you know, the person, you know, next to you, the person you walk by on the quad, you know, every little thing we can do to make Notre Dame more of an inclusive place, I think should be done swiftly. So yeah, thank you.
First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to the university for having all of us up here to uplift our respective communities. It truly means a lot. But just to summarize everything, I feel like, you know, Notre Dame, for me, has been quite the adventure. It's had its good times and bad times, but it's a whole roller coaster and it's ending. But I feel that for everyone who is still navigating this university, finding their homes, whether it's in their clubs, in their dorms, or for those that are still like not sure where they fit in, you do have a place here. You have a whole community behind you, whether you know it or not. And the university, for sure, I love this university, even though I know that there are faults, but work is being done. So thank you.
I want to say thanks for including me as a law student and bringing the law school too with this event. And I've spoken to many different programs and departments, and I know sometimes we all get really caught up in what we're doing every day, but I'm really glad you all invited me here and that I could be a representative for the law school. But my closing words would really just to be keep learning, keep educating yourself, you know, keep trying to grow your knowledge of differences and different cultures, and everyone's experiences are just so different. And even as a third-year law student, I'm going to keep trying to educate myself, keep learning. It never stops.
No, I want to say muchas gracias a todos. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. Because, man, the reality is, like, we've been here, doesn't matter anything if you guys are not there, you know? So, like, we can talk to a wall and there's not going to be any change. So, you guys showing up is what we're looking for, and we're really grateful for, you know, just being open-minded and being able to take some time in the night to listen to us talk. That's not easy, so thank you very much, and we appreciate it. So.
All right, I just want to say thank you to everyone for watching and showing up, like everyone else has said. And I also want to say that I'm very hopeful for the future of this university. It seems like there has been a lot of change in just the 3 years that I've been here, and I'm super excited for what the years will bring.
thank you all, and I'm going to call on Alan Yomo to go ahead and make some summary comments.
Howdy, y'all. I am Alan Jomo. I have the distinct pleasure of serving as student body president. Before I begin my remarks, I want to extend my gratitude to the Office of the President for creating space for this event. Father Jenkins, I see you in the front row taking notes, so thank you so much for listening. To the panelists, Ify, Stephanie, Gabe, Connor, Yvette, and Alvaro, thank you so much for sharing your hearts and your experience. To the moderator, Dr. Pender Hughes, thank you so much for guiding and enriching an important conversation. I want to take this moment to also acknowledge the momentous occasion yesterday of the university's full observance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I am grateful that through the advocacy of former Johnson Hall Senator Eliza Smith, Student Government's Director for Student Empowerment, Cassidy Farrell, Student Government's Director for Diversity and Inclusion, Amaya Medeiros, and numerous other members of the MLK Coalition, that students, faculty, and staff were afforded with a space to reflect and honor the legacy of Dr. King. So thank you. Today, this evening, serves as a call for us to engage regularly with the struggle for racial justice and to labor to cultivate a beloved community. And that compels me to reflect upon the summer of 2020. In the summer of 2020, perhaps one of the most prominent and memorable ways that individuals engage with activism happened on a Tuesday. It became known as Blackout Tuesday. On Blackout Tuesday, people all over the world, not only limited to the United States, in a show of unity and in a show of solidarity with the ongoing struggle for racial justice, decided to post black squares on Instagram, vowing to spend the day reflecting on ongoing issues. At the time, the efforts reminded me of the various social media activism methodologies for previous issues, such as the Sudan crisis, Australian wildfires, and net neutrality. What worried me the most about this method was the majority of individuals who engaged strongly with these issues walked away the moment these issues were not in the mainstream of discussion. The reality is that the majority of those social media activism who retweeted, who reposted, and who wrote on matters of injustice during the trends, as I could call them at this point, would struggle a week later or two after to give updates on the ongoing struggle and the ongoing issues. Therefore, Blackout Tuesday for me felt like virtue signaling. And while it was a step in the right direction for informing individuals about the ongoing struggle for racial justice, it failed to empower social media users to be activists beyond their existence on social media, beyond their existence on the internet. You know, we blacked out the internet on a Tuesday, but Wednesday came, then Thursday. Suddenly, we were back to the normal day-to-day. Dr. Jemar Tisby, a New York best-selling author, an activist, and a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, in a podcast and newsletter, offered a reflection on the dream of Dr. King that I find fitting to conclude our discussion here today. He begins by asking, why does MLK's often misused dream remain so elusive? Why are we still fighting some of the same battles, including the fight for voting rights, today as King and others fought for half a century ago? This is the answer he offers. We have the words of Dr. King, but not his walk. We quote King, but we do not live like him. We celebrate him, but we do not imitate him. We love King's wisdom, but not King's way. We all have a critical role to play in maintaining and creating a beloved community. I invite each one of you to think about your next step on this journey. You can write down your next step on the cards we distributed to you as you came in, or you can submit, for those who are online, to the links shown on the screen. Together, after, let us proceed to the main building, Rotunda, where we can begin to bring those commitments to a prayer at the candlelight service. You know, it's fitting that today is Tuesday, just like that day in August. And tomorrow, Wednesday, is going to come. And then Thursday. Are we going to go back to the normal day-to-day? Or are we going to labor and do our part to ensure that we build a beloved community where justice rolls like a river and righteousness like a mighty stream? Thank you.